July 23rd, 2019. It was the ninth day of the search for Madison Wells, and hope, a fragile thing, was all but extinguished. The air in Olympic National Forest was thick with the scent of damp earth and the unspoken fear that clung to every branch, every moss-covered stone. At approximately 14 hours and 10 minutes, deep within a section of overgrown forest, long forgotten, a retired park ranger named Tom Bradley pushed open a rusted metal grate. Inside the cold, damp concrete tunnel, nearly a half-mile from the main entrance, they found her. Madison Wells was alive, but her emaciated wrist was tightly chained to a corroded metal pipe, a heavy, industrial-grade restraint biting into her skin. The relief should have been absolute, but the horror of her discovery, bound within this hidden, man-made crypt, only deepened the central question: who had built this prison beneath the ancient trees? And why was a child found captive there? You will find out how the forest's forgotten secrets became a cage, and how a family's nightmare was unraveled in the story that begins now, rewinding to the day before the terror. To truly understand the chilling reality of Madison Wells's captivity, we must first return to the deceptive tranquility of a summer evening, 9 days earlier, when the Olympic National Forest was not a tomb, but a sanctuary. It was July 14th, 2019, and the Wells family, like countless others, had sought refuge in the ancient, sprawling embrace of Washington State's wilderness. The Hoh River Trail, renowned for its primeval beauty, beckoned with its towering old-growth trees, their trunks draped in thick emerald moss, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy that filtered the afternoon sun into shifting shafts of gold. The air itself was a living thing here, perpetually damp, carrying the scent of rich, decaying earth, the sharp tang of pine needles, and the cold, ceaseless rush of the Hoh River. Sounds were muted, absorbed by the dense foliage, broken only by the distant calls of unseen birds and the rhythmic drip of condensation from the leaves above. It was a world of profound, indifferent grandeur, a place where human concerns often felt small against the vastness of nature. For the Wells family, David, Sarah, and their daughter Madison, this annual camping trip was a cherished ritual. David Wells, 47, a carpenter by trade, carried the quiet strength of a man whose hands knew labor. Tall, with broad shoulders and a salt and pepper beard, he moved with a grounded steadiness. His wife, Sarah, 45, was the meticulous planner, her blonde hair cut short and practical, her kind, weary eyes usually holding a spark of quiet determination. She favored comfortable, functional clothing, perfectly suited for the rugged beauty of the forest. And then there was Madison, 16, on the cusp of womanhood, a bright and observant girl whose quiet strength often belied her age. She had long, dark brown hair, often pulled back in a messy bun, and intelligent, curious eyes that took in the world around her with a thoughtful gaze. Madison loved reading mysteries, often lost in the pages of a dog-eared paperback, and she carried a small sketchbook everywhere, filling its pages with detailed renderings of the forest's flora and fauna. She spoke with a soft, thoughtful cadence, often pausing to consider her words before offering them. Their campsite, nestled deep within a designated area along the Hoh River Trail, was a familiar tableau of canvas and nylon, a temporary home amidst the towering giants. That evening, dinner had been a simple affair of campfire-cooked burgers and s'mores, the sticky sweetness a comfort against the cooling air. As dusk deepened, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and deep indigo, the forest began its slow shift from day to night. The sounds of the river grew more pronounced, a constant, murmuring presence. Inside their tent, illuminated by the soft glow of a battery-powered lantern, Madison had been sketching in her notebook, occasionally looking up to share a quiet observation with her parents, who were settling into their sleeping bags. The air outside had grown crisp, carrying the unmistakable chill of a mountain night. Around 11 p.m., Madison announced her intention to use the restroom facilities, a short walk from their tent. It was an ordinary teenage act, a brief moment of privacy away from the family unit. Her parents, already half asleep, mumbled their acknowledgments. David, ever cautious, reminded her to take her flashlight. Madison nodded, a faint smile on her lips, and slipped out of the tent. She carried a small flashlight, its beam a weak circle against the dense, encroaching darkness, a tiny, fleeting beacon in the vast, indifferent forest. She had pulled on a light jacket over her t-shirt and jeans, a sensible choice for the cool July night. The gentle rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the steady hum of the forest at night were the only witnesses to her departure. Her parents, drifting deeper into sleep, heard nothing more than the soft zipping of the tent flap and the fading crunch of her footsteps on the pine needle-strewn path. The night settled, quiet and seemingly undisturbed. 3 hours later, at approximately 2 a.m., Sarah Wells stirred awake. The silence in the tent felt different, a distinct absence rather than a mere quietude. A mother's instinct, sharp and sudden, pierced through the lingering haze of sleep. She reached across David's sleeping bag, her hand brushing the empty space where Madison should have been. Her heart gave a sudden, painful lurch. "Madison?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the dark. There was no reply. A cold knot of dread began to tighten in her stomach. She sat up, fumbling for her own headlamp, its beam cutting through the inky blackness. The first thing she saw was Madison's sleeping bag, untouched, perfectly smooth on the air mattress. Next to it, on Madison's pillow, lay her phone, its screen dark and lifeless. Her daughter, a typical teenager tethered to her device, never went anywhere without it, not even to the restroom. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes darted around the small tent. The clothes Madison had been wearing earlier, her t-shirt, her jeans were gone, and the small flashlight David had reminded her to take, it was missing too. Panic, cold and visceral, began to claw its way up Sarah's throat. This was not right. Madison was meticulous, responsible. She wouldn't have left her phone. She wouldn't have left her sleeping bag if she had just gone for a walk. This was not a child wandering off. This was something else. A terrifying, sickening dread consumed her, chilling her to the bone. "David!" she hissed, her voice hoarse with a sudden, overwhelming fear. She shook him awake, her hands trembling. "David, Madison's gone. She's not here." David Wells blinked awake, disoriented, the gentle rhythms of sleep shattered by the raw terror in his wife's voice. He sat up, pushing his salt and pepper beard away from his face, trying to process her words. "Gone? What do you mean, gone? She just went to the restroom." "No," Sarah choked out, her voice breaking. "She's not in her sleeping bag. Her phone's here. David, her phone is here. And her flashlight is gone. She's gone." The weight of Sarah's words settled over David, heavy and cold. He scrambled out of his sleeping bag, his large hands fumbling for his own headlamp. In the sudden, harsh beam of light, the untouched sleeping bag and the silent phone became stark, terrifying symbols. They stumbled out of the tent, calling Madison's name into the profound, indifferent darkness of the Olympic National Forest. Their voices, raw with a burgeoning terror, were swallowed whole by the ancient trees, echoing back only the sound of their own escalating panic. The world had just dissolved into a parent's worst nightmare, and the long, agonizing descent into the unknown had begun. The world had just dissolved into a parent's worst nightmare, and the long, agonizing descent into the unknown had begun. The frantic calls to 911 inches, the pre-dawn hours of July 15th, 2019, were met with the calm, methodical response of emergency services. Within minutes, the first local law enforcement officers, followed by park rangers, were converging on the Wells campsite. Headlights cut through the inky blackness, transforming the familiar forest paths into fleeting tunnels of light and shadow. The initial response was swift, but the sheer scale of the Olympic National Forest immediately presented an overwhelming challenge. This was not a suburban street. It was a vast, primeval wilderness where a missing person could vanish without a trace in a matter of steps. Sarah and David, their voices raw with a terror that clawed at their throats, recounted every detail, every last sight and sound. The untouched sleeping bag, the phone on the pillow, Madison's missing flashlight, each detail a fresh stab of dread, confirming their worst fears. This was not a simple case of a child getting lost. Madison was responsible. She was prepared. The missing flashlight suggested intent, a purposeful journey, however brief. But the abandoned phone screamed the opposite. The contradictions were agonizing, fueling the chaos of those first crucial hours. As the sun began to paint the eastern sky with hesitant streaks of gray and rose, the campsite transformed into a makeshift command center. More park rangers arrived, their uniforms a stark contrast to the natural palette of the forest. Local sheriff's deputies established perimeters, stringing bright yellow tape that seemed absurdly fragile against the ancient trees. Radios crackled with urgent dispatches, their clipped, professional tones doing little to calm the frantic parents. A grid search was initiated, starting from the campsite and expanding outwards in concentric circles. Volunteers, drawn by the escalating news of a missing teenager, began to arrive, their faces etched with concern and a desperate willingness to help. Over the next few hours, the number of searchers swelled from a handful of professionals to dozens, then hundreds, all converging on the Hoh River Trail. Ground teams, a mix of seasoned rangers and eager but often inexperienced volunteers, fanned out into the dense, unforgiving terrain. Their flashlights, now joined by the rising sun, struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of old-growth trees. The forest floor, a treacherous carpet of moss, fallen logs, and tangled roots, made every step a deliberate effort. Visibility was often limited to mere feet, even in daylight, as ferns grew shoulder-high and rhododendron thickets formed impenetrable walls of foliage. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, carried only the rustle of their own movements, the distant calls of unseen birds, and the ceaseless, indifferent murmur of the Hoh River. Every broken branch, every disturbed patch of moss, every footprint was scrutinized, but yielded nothing. The meticulous search, designed to leave no stone unturned, was swallowed whole by the forest's immense indifference. Sarah and David were relentless. They refused to leave the command center, their eyes scanning every new face, every returning search team, desperate for a shred of hope. Sarah, her short blonde hair now disheveled, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and endless tears, paced with a nervous energy that belied her exhaustion. She clung to every update, every theory, her mind racing through every possible scenario. David, his broad shoulders slumped, sat hunched over laminated maps, spread across a folding table, his calloused finger tracing and retracing the paths already covered. He spoke little, but the lines etched around his eyes and the tight set of his jaw betrayed a silent, profound grief that was only beginning to set in. He was a man accustomed to building, to creating order. This unraveling was an alien, terrifying landscape. As the search escalated, K-9 units were brought in, their highly trained noses a critical tool in such an environment. The dogs, primarily German shepherds and bloodhounds, worked with a focused intensity, their handlers guiding them through the dense undergrowth. In the early afternoon of July 15th, a glimmer of hope emerged. One of the bloodhounds, a powerful animal named Ranger, picked up a scent near the restroom facilities Madison had intended to use. Ranger pulled his handler, a seasoned park ranger named Michael, with an undeniable urgency, not towards the main trail, but towards a lesser-used, overgrown dirt track veering away from the campground. This was an abandoned fire management road, a relic from the 1960 seconds, rarely used now and barely visible beneath a tangle of ferns and fallen branches. The discovery sent a jolt of renewed purpose through the search teams. Perhaps Madison had simply taken a wrong turn, disoriented in the dark. Perhaps she was seeking shelter further off the beaten path. Teams immediately converged on the abandoned road, their hopes rising with every step. Ranger continued to lead them deeper into the forest, his nose close to the ground, his tail wagging with a focused determination. The old road, once a clear path for fire suppression vehicles, was now little more than a suggestion, reclaimed by the relentless growth of the wilderness. They followed it for nearly a quarter of a mile, the scent strong, palpable, suggesting Madison had indeed walked this way. Then, abruptly, everything stopped. Near what appeared to be an overgrown service area, a small, flattened clearing where old equipment might once have been stored, now choked with invasive blackberry bushes and towering nettles, Ranger faltered. He circled, nose to the ground, then lifted his head, whining softly. He cast about, confused, pulling his handler first one way, then another, but the powerful scent he had followed so faithfully was gone, vanished. It was as if Madison had simply evaporated into the humid forest air. Other K9 units were brought in, their handlers optimistic. They too followed the same initial track along the abandoned road, their noses confirming the faint but present human scent. But each time, without fail, they reached the same overgrown service area, circled in confusion, and then lost the trail completely. The scent simply dissolved. The anomaly was baffling. How could a scent line, so strong and clear, simply cease to exist in the middle of a dense forest? There were no signs of a struggle, no discarded clothing, no broken branches, no disturbed earth to suggest a sudden, violent turn of events. It defied logic. If Madison had continued walking, the scent would have continued. If she had been picked up by a vehicle, there would be tire tracks, a clearer disruption. But there was nothing. Just an abrupt, unsettling void. Frustration mounted among the search teams. Days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting light through the canopy and the deepening lines of exhaustion on Sarah and David's faces. The initial, frantic chaos had given way to a grim, methodical grind. Over 400 volunteers had joined the effort, combing through 50 square miles of dense, indifferent forest. But the results were always the same. Nothing. Systematic efforts yielded only more questions. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew overhead, their mechanical hum a constant presence. But the dense canopy, thick with moss and evergreen needles, absorbed their efforts, rendering them ineffective. Sarah clutched Madison's untouched sleeping bag, its familiar pattern a cruel mockery of comfort. She wouldn't just leave it, David. Her voice was a raw whisper, barely audible over the crackle of a distant search radio. Not her phone, not her sleeping bag. David, hunched over the laminated map, his calloused finger tracing the faded, dotted line of the abandoned fire management road. His eyes were bloodshot, fixed on the green expanse. "The dogs keep getting pulled towards the old service road," he muttered, the words a weary echo of earlier reports. Then nothing. Like she just dissolved. He looked up at Sarah, a silent plea for understanding in his gaze. "What are we missing, Sarah? What are we not seeing?" The initial theories that Madison had wandered off, disoriented, or perhaps suffered an injury and was hiding, began to unravel under the weight of the evidence. or rather, the lack thereof. A lost person, even injured, would eventually leave some trace, a dropped item, a scuff mark, a faint cry, but Madison Wells had left nothing but an abruptly vanishing scent trail. The forest, once a place of sanctuary and natural beauty, now felt less like a benevolent wilderness and more like a conscious, mocking entity, silently concealing a terrifying secret. Its towering trees and dense undergrowth, once a source of peace, now served as an impenetrable green maze, a silent accomplice to Madison's disappearance. As the hours stretched into days, the gnawing dread transformed into a cold, hard certainty for Sarah and David. Madison had not simply wandered off, she had been taken, and the vast, indifferent forest was holding her secret close. The grim, methodical grind continued. Each passing hour, each fruitless sweep of the forest floor, deepened the chasm of dread that had swallowed the Wells family. The initial, frantic calls for volunteers had been answered by hundreds, then thousands, from across the state and beyond, but the sheer scale of the Olympic National Forest was a relentless opponent. 50 square miles, a verdant labyrinth of towering ancient trees, impossibly dense undergrowth, and a perpetually damp, moss-covered terrain swallowed every effort, every hopeful step, with an indifferent silence. The air, once imbued with the promise of summer adventure, now hung heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and the unspoken despair of a community rallying against an invisible foe. Investigators, led by Detective Alex Rodriguez, worked tirelessly, their initial professional optimism slowly eroding into a frustrated determination. Rodriguez, sharp and analytical, meticulously sifted through every piece of information, every theory, every dead end. She had seen countless missing persons cases, but the sheer lack of physical evidence here was unprecedented, almost defiant. The vanishing scent trail, the absence of any disturbed ground or discarded items, gnawed at her. It defied the known patterns of a lost child or even a runaway. This was something else, something calculated. Helicopters, equipped with advanced thermal imaging cameras, became a constant, droning presence in the sky above the Hoh River Trail. Their pilots, expert in navigating the treacherous mountain air, flew grid patterns for hours. Their sophisticated sensors, designed to pick up any heat signature, but the forest, in its ancient wisdom, proved too formidable. The dense, multi-layered canopy of old-growth firs and cedars, draped in thick, moisture-laden moss and fern, acted as a natural shield, absorbing and scattering the thermal readings. The perpetual dampness, the cool shadows cast by trees that had stood for centuries, rendered the expensive technology largely ineffective. The reports came back uniformly: nothing. No warmth where there should be. No human imprint on the vast, cool canvas of the forest. The only signals were from deer, elk, and the occasional bear, their forms dissolving back into the green maze as quickly as they appeared on the screens. As the days bled into a grueling week, the search for Madison Wells became a national story. News vans lined the main access roads, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like desperate antennae. Reporters, their voices hushed and solemn, delivered updates from the edge of the search perimeter, broadcasting Sarah and David's agony to a sympathetic nation. Public pressure mounted, a heavy weight on the shoulders of the already exhausted law enforcement and park services. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted Madison home. Yet, the evidence remained stubbornly, maddeningly elusive. The systematic efforts, now involving state and federal agencies, yielded nothing but increasingly wider circles of empty forest. The frustration among the search teams was palpable. Seasoned rangers, accustomed to the vagaries of the wilderness, openly admitted their bewilderment. They had encountered lost hikers, injured campers, even those who had intentionally disappeared. But Madison Wells seemed to have vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the ghost of a scent trail that abruptly ended. The vastness of the Olympic National Forest, once a source of pride and awe, now felt like a taunting, indifferent beast. It was amidst this growing despair, this dawning realization that conventional methods were failing, that Tom Bradley began to make his presence felt. In his mid-70s, Tom was a living repository of the Olympic National Forest's hidden history, a man whose intimate, almost archaic knowledge of the land set him apart. He wasn't officially part of the search, not anymore. His days of active service were long past, but he had been drawn to the site by an instinct, a quiet, almost spiritual connection to the forest he had patrolled for decades. Tom was a lean, wiry man, his frame a testament to years of tireless walking through rugged terrain. His face, a road map of wrinkles and sun-weathered lines, bore the marks of countless dawns and dusks, spent under the vast, open skies of the Pacific Northwest. His eyes, a sharp, clear blue, seemed to miss nothing, constantly scanning, assessing, absorbing the subtle nuances of the environment. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone intimately familiar with every root and stone, often leaning on a walking stick carved from local cedar, its surface smoothed by years of use. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried the weight of experience, delivered in a slow, deliberate drawl that commanded attention, even if only for its sheer rarity. He had spent the early days of the search observing, a silent sentinel on the periphery of the organized chaos. He watched the K-9 units, their frantic circles, the handlers' perplexed expressions at the abandoned service area. He listened to the frustrated radio chatter about the ineffectiveness of the helicopters. While others saw a blank wall of forest, Tom saw layers of history, seams of human intervention, long forgotten by modern maps and digital databases. He remembered the forest not just as it was now, but as it had been, through the lens of changing park policies, forgotten projects, and the ghosts of old infrastructure. One afternoon, as Detective Rodriguez and a weary captain of the National Park Service reviewed maps under a hastily erected canopy, Tom Bradley approached. He hadn't been invited, but his presence was tolerated, almost expected, given his legendary status among the old guard. He stood quietly for a moment, his gaze fixed on the laminated map, his cedar stick tapping a gentle rhythm against the damp earth. "They're looking in the wrong places," he finally said, his voice a low rumble, cutting through the strained silence. Rodriguez looked up, her expression a mix of professional courtesy and thinly veiled exhaustion. "Mr. Bradley, we've covered 50 square miles, every grid, every trail, every drainage. We've used thermal, ground-penetrating radar in some areas. What do you suggest we're missing?" Her tone was polite, but firm, hinting at the countless unsolicited theories she had already dismissed. Tom didn't take offense. He simply nodded, his sharp blue eyes meeting hers. "You're looking times on times the surface. You're looking where the forest times wants times you to look." He paused, a habit that always seemed to stretch the moment, making his eventual words carry more impact. "But this forest, it has secrets, human secrets, buried ones." He gestured vaguely towards the area of the vanished scent trail, the overgrown service area that had become the epicenter of the search's greatest mystery. "That old fire road," he continued, "it wasn't just for trucks. Back in the 60s, when they were expanding the fire management network, they put in a lot of things the new maps don't show. Access points, drainage systems, things meant to be temporary, but the forest just grew over 'em, swallowed 'em whole." He spoke of the 1,960 seconds, a time when the Forest Service had a different approach, a different budget, and a different understanding of permanence. He spoke of concrete arteries, built to channel water, or provide quick access for heavy equipment to potential fire lines, often leading into the very heart of the dense wilderness, only to be abandoned and forgotten. These were not natural caves or geological features. These were man-made scars, now hidden beneath layers of moss, fern, and thyme. His words, though delivered calmly, painted a picture of a hidden, man-made world beneath the majestic, primeval surface everyone else was searching. Captain Miller, who had been listening with a skeptical frown, interjected. "Mr. Bradley, we have the most comprehensive geological and historical maps available. There's no record of any significant underground structures in that particular area, certainly not anything large enough to conceal a person." Tom merely smiled, a faint, almost pitying curve of his lips. "Maps are for what they times want, times you to know, not for what times is asterisk. Some things, they were never meant to be on a map. Or they were, for a short while, then scratched right off and buried under a layer of bureaucratic dust. Sometimes, they just let nature take 'em back." He tapped his cedar stick against the map, not on any marked trail, but in the blank, green expanse that represented the unknown. If the dogs lost the scent there, clean, like that, it means she didn't just walk off. She went somewhere, somewhere hidden, somewhere times down, asterisk. His observations, initially dismissed by some younger officers as the ramblings of an old-timer, began to resonate with Detective Rodriguez. Her analytical mind, frustrated by the lack of tangible data, was open to unconventional possibilities. The abrupt disappearance of the scent, the lack of any struggle, the very defiance of logic, it hinted at a deliberate, concealed act. And Tom Bradley, with his weathered face and piercing blue eyes, represented a knowledge base that no satellite image or digital map could ever replicate. He was a human archive, a living memory of the forest's secrets, both natural and man-made. The emotional arc for Sarah and David Wells had by now reached a devastating low. Hope, once a flickering candle, was now a dying ember. The initial, frantic energy had given way to a profound, bone-weary exhaustion that permeated every muscle, every thought. Sarah, her voice raw from constant talking and suppressed screams, found herself staring blankly at Madison's photo, the vibrant smile of her daughter a painful contrast to the grim reality. She no longer spoke of times finding times Madison, but of times bringing her home, asterisk. A subtle but significant shift in language that acknowledged the darkening prognosis. David, the steadfast carpenter, a man who built things to last, now felt his own world crumbling. He would sit for hours by the radio, listening to the crackle of static, his hands, usually so capable, now lying limp in his lap. He thought of the forest, the beautiful, ancient trees, and felt a burning resentment. It was holding his daughter, keeping her from him, mocking their desperate efforts. The idea of Madison being lost, simply wandering, had been replaced by a far more terrifying certainty. She was held. And the knowledge that someone had taken her, that someone was actively concealing her within this vast wilderness, was a torment beyond words. The conversations among the official teams grew grimmer. The clock was ticking, not just for Madison's survival, but for the very classification of the case. As the 9th day of the search dawned, the term rescue began to fade from the official lexicon, replaced by the chilling, euphemistic whispers of recovery. The vast, indifferent forest, with its deep, impenetrable secrets, seemed poised to absorb Madison Wells entirely, leaving behind only the haunting echo of a vanished child and the unimaginable agony of a family broken. The investigation had reached a critical juncture, hovering on the precipice of becoming a cold case, a tragic footnote in the endless annals of the lost, unless someone could unlock a secret the forest had held for decades. The weight of Tom Bradley's words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and the quiet authority of decades spent beneath the colossal, indifferent canopy. His suggestion, initially met with the weariness of 1,000 exhausted denials, began to settle in Detective Rodriguez's mind like a seed finding purchase in fertile ground. The sudden, inexplicable vanishing of the scent trail, the absence of any struggle, the sheer defiance of logical explanation, it all pointed to an act of deliberate, concealed malice. And Tom Bradley, with his weathered face and eyes that held the deep, ancient wisdom of the forest itself, offered a path no modern map could chart. Rodriguez looked from the pristine, laminated map to the old ranger, then back again. Her analytical mind, starved of concrete data, began to process the unconventional. "Show me, Mr. Bradley," she said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence, a new resolve hardening her tone. "Show me where these access points might be." Tom didn't hesitate. He led them, not along a marked trail, but through an almost impenetrable thicket, pushing aside ancient ferns and ducking beneath gnarled branches draped in emerald moss. The air grew heavier here, the light dimmer, as the forest swallowed them whole. After a strenuous half-hour, they arrived at what appeared to be nothing more than a dense wall of overgrown vegetation, indistinguishable from 1,000 other similar spots in the sprawling wilderness. Tom, however, moved with a certainty born of intimate knowledge. He knelt, clearing away decades of fallen leaves and matted undergrowth until a faint outline began to emerge. It was a rusted, almost fully consumed metal grate, barely visible beneath a tangle of roots and earth, guarding a dark aperture. It was an entrance, a mouth to a hidden world, long forgotten by all but a select few. Captain Miller, his skepticism still warring with a desperate need for a breakthrough, moved closer, shining his tactical flashlight into the gloom. The beam was immediately swallowed by an inky blackness that seemed to absorb all light, returning only a faint, stale odor of damp earth and something metallic. "This is a culvert, Mr. Bradley," he ventured, his voice echoing slightly in the sudden proximity of the opening. "Perhaps a drainage pipe." Tom shook his head slowly. "Not just drainage. Not in this section. This was part of a rapid response system, concrete arteries, designed to get men and equipment deep into the forest, fast, to contain a fire. Then, when the budget shifted, the project was deemed unnecessary, too expensive to maintain, too remote to be useful. So they just let the forest take it back, covered the entrances, scrubbed it from the records, buried it. The idea was audacious, terrifying in its implication. If Madison had been taken this way, it meant a level of premeditation and intimate knowledge of the forest that went far beyond a random act. It meant she hadn't just been lost, she had been deliberately, meticulously hidden, swallowed not by nature, but by human design. The decision was made. While official protocols called for extensive mapping and structural assessments, the urgency of Madison's dwindling chances overruled caution. A specialized search and rescue team, equipped with spelunking gear, powerful lights, and communication devices, was quickly assembled. Detective Rodriguez insisted on being part of the initial entry, her determination a palpable force. As the team prepared, the air above ground remained thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, but beneath, a new atmosphere began to form. It was one of cold, damp anticipation, a claustrophobic dread that pressed in on them even before they entered. The vast, open expanse of the forest was replaced by the suffocating reality of a subterranean world. Each piece of equipment clinked with a sterile, unsettling precision as it was checked and rechecked. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whispered commands of the team leader and the steady, rhythmic drips of moisture from the mouth of the tunnel. The first member of the team, A grizzled veteran named Sergeant Davies slipped into the opening, his headlamp cutting a stark, artificial beam through the absolute darkness. Clear? His voice crackled through the comms, a little muffled but steady. Rodriguez followed. Then another officer, their entry methodical, deliberate. The tunnel immediately closed in, the concrete walls rough and cold against their shoulders, the air heavy with the smell of stagnant water and decaying leaves. The light from their headlamps struggled against the pervasive black, revealing only small sections of the damp, echoing passage at a time. This was not a natural cave, but a man-made construct, a testament to a forgotten era of human intervention in the wilderness. The tunnel stretched forward, a concrete maw swallowed by the earth, its floor uneven with accumulated silt and debris. Water seeped from hairline cracks in the ceiling, forming small, cold puddles that reflected their lights like fractured eyes. Every sound was magnified, every rustle, every intake of breath. The silence was not peaceful but oppressive, a vacuum waiting to be filled. They moved slowly, painstakingly, calling out Madison's name every few minutes, their voices swallowed by the oppressive space. The first tunnel branched, then branched again, a dizzying, disorienting labyrinth beneath the seemingly benign surface of the forest. The maps they had, even Tom Bradley's crude sketches, offered little help in the tangled reality of the underground. These were not mere drainage culverts. They were extensive, interconnected systems, some running for hundreds of yards, others ending abruptly in cave-ins or solid rock. Hours crawled by. The initial surge of hope began to wane, replaced by the grim reality of the seemingly endless, empty passages. They had explored 2 main tunnels, each stretching for what felt like miles, their beams revealing only the cold, unyielding concrete and the occasional scurrying insect. The air grew colder, heavier. Doubt, a persistent, insidious enemy, began to creep into the minds of even the most seasoned rescuers. Had Tom Bradley been mistaken? Was this just another dead end? Another false hope in a search already riddled with them? Just as the decision was being considered to rotate teams, to pull back and reassess, Sergeant Davies, who had taken the lead in the third, longest branch of the system, stopped abruptly. His voice, usually so calm and measured, crackled over the comms, laced with a raw, undeniable urgency. "Wait! Hold up! I see something. Light. Faint. But it's there." A jolt of adrenaline shot through Rodriguez. They pushed forward, their pace quickening, the claustrophobia momentarily forgotten. The beam of Davies's light, now joined by hers, cut through the gloom, revealing a distant, flickering glow. It was an unnatural light, not the cold, blue-white of their headlamps, but a warmer, almost orange hue, suggesting battery-powered lanterns. The air, already stale, now carried a faint, almost imperceptible scent that wasn't just damp earth or metal. It was a human scent. The metallic tang of disuse was mixed with something more organic, more present. They rounded a final bend. The tunnel opened slightly into a wider chamber, still concrete, but subtly different. And there, in the dim, flickering light of 2 battery-powered lanterns, was Madison. She was huddled against the far wall, her thin frame almost skeletal, her long, dark brown hair matted and streaked with dirt. Her face, usually so vibrant, was a mask of extreme dehydration and profound exhaustion. Her lips cracked and her skin pale, almost translucent, but her eyes, though wide and shadowed with terror, were open. They were fixed on the approaching lights, a flicker of something almost like disbelief, then a fragile, dawning hope. One of her emaciated wrists was tightly secured to a corroded metal pipe that ran along the base of the tunnel wall. The restraint was not a simple handcuff, but a heavy, industrial-grade chain, biting cruelly into her skin, secured with a sturdy padlock. It was a stark, brutal image, a young girl, reduced to a desperate, primal state, bound within a man-made tomb. Sergeant Davies was the first to reach her, his movements a practiced blend of urgency and gentleness. "Madison," he murmured, his voice thick with a mixture of relief and horror. "Madison, we're here. You're safe now." Rodriguez knelt beside him, her professional composure momentarily cracking at the sight. Madison flinched, her body tensing, but her gaze, though wary, remained locked on their faces. Her throat was too dry to speak, her voice a reedy, almost inaudible rasp. The chamber was small, a makeshift prison carved from the forgotten infrastructure of the forest. Near Madison, a small pile of blankets and an old sleeping bag offered a meager attempt at comfort. Beside them, an assortment of stockpiled supplies was neatly arranged: plastic bottles of water, energy bars, a few canned goods, and a small, battery-operated radio. It was clear this was not a temporary hiding place, but a meticulously planned, long-term confinement. The air carried the faint, lingering scent of human habitation, a disturbing counterpoint to the damp, earthy cold. While the medical team moved in to assess Madison's critical condition, carefully unchaining her, offering sips of water, and wrapping her in an emergency blanket, Rodriguez began to survey the scene. Every detail was a piece of a horrifying puzzle: the specific brand of chains, the precise arrangement of supplies, the meticulous nature of the setup. This was not the act of a madman. This was the work of a calculated, methodical predator. As Madison was slowly brought back from the brink of collapse, her eyes still scanning the faces around her with a fragile apprehension, she began to speak. Her voice was a raw, dry whisper, each word an agonizing effort, but the truth, when it came, landed with the force of a physical blow. He said, "My parents, accident." Her words were fragmented, broken by gasps and the sheer effort of speaking. "Uniform, ranger, hat." She described being lured away from the campsite, the deceptive urgency in her captor's voice, the sudden, overwhelming clamp of a hand over her mouth. She spoke of a masked figure, his face always obscured, who visited twice a day, bringing food and water, checking the chain, his presence a chilling, silent terror. He had never spoken beyond the initial deception, never revealed his face, a ghost in her underground prison. The implications were immediate and profound. This was not a lost child, not a runaway, not a tragic accident. Madison Wells had been kidnapped. She had been held captive, alive, for 9 agonizing days, in a hidden, subterranean crypt, barely a half-mile from where hundreds of people had scoured the surface. The entire narrative of the search, the assumptions, the despair, shattered and reformed into something far more chilling, far more sinister. The case had just cracked wide open, but the true horror was only just beginning to reveal itself. The forest had held its secret, but now, finally, through the quiet wisdom of an old ranger and the resilience of a terrified girl, it had begun to yield its truth. The discovery of Madison Wells, alive but barely, inside a forgotten tunnel beneath Olympic National Forest, detonated a new phase of the investigation. The immediate, frantic search for a missing child transformed, with chilling speed, into a meticulously orchestrated hunt for a predator. The tunnel, once a tomb, became a crime scene of unparalleled importance, demanding an almost surgical precision from the forensic teams who descended into its cold, damp embrace. Detective Alex Rodriguez, her face grim with a renewed sense of purpose, oversaw the initial securing of the site. Every inch of the concrete passage, from the hidden entrance to the makeshift chamber where Madison had been found, was treated as sacred ground. The air, heavy with the metallic tang of disuse and the lingering scent of human habitation, was meticulously sampled. Specialized lighting was rigged, battling the absolute darkness, revealing the subtle textures of the concrete walls, the glistening condensation, and the scattered debris. The forensic process began, slow and methodical, an intricate dance against time and the elements. Every item within the chamber was carefully photographed, tagged, and catalogued before being removed. The industrial-grade chain that had bound Madison, still secured to the corroded metal pipe, became a crucial piece of evidence. Its links were dusted for fingerprints, its surface examined under magnification for any trace of the hands that had secured it. Tool marks, minute but distinct, were found etched into the padlock and the points where the chain had been manipulated. These were photographed and cast, their unique patterns offering a potential signature of the perpetrator's instruments. The stockpiled supplies, the plastic water bottles, the energy bars, the canned goods, the battery-operated radio, even the worn blankets and sleeping bag, were collected with extreme care. Each item held the potential for DNA, for fingerprints, for any microscopic trace of the individual who had brought them there, who had meticulously arranged them day after day for 9 agonizing days. The battery-powered lanterns, still casting a faint, sickly glow when found, were collected, their specific make and model noted. Even the dust on the floor, the mineral deposits on the walls, and the stagnant water in small puddles were sampled. The environment itself, cold and indifferent, held a silent record of the events that had transpired within its concrete shell. Back at the temporary command center, set up in a cleared section of the park's administrative building, the evidence began its cascade. The DNA samples, painstakingly extracted from the tunnel, particularly from the drinking containers and food wrappers, were rushed to the state lab. The tool mark castings were compared against an extensive database of known instruments, a long shot but a necessary one. The specific brands of supplies were traced, their distribution patterns analyzed, searching for any unusual purchase histories. Early results began to filter back. The DNA, though minimal, pointed to a single male individual, not Madison's father, not any of the rescuers. It was a clear, unambiguous profile of an unknown subject. The tool marks, while not matching a specific registered tool, indicated a common, high-quality bolt cutter and a specific brand of padlock, suggesting a deliberate choice for durability and security. More chillingly, the radio found in the tunnel, a model popular among outdoor enthusiasts, had been modified. Its internal components showed traces of a signal booster, implying that the captor had not only planned for long-term confinement, but also for communication, perhaps to monitor search efforts from within his subterranean lair. Detective Rodriguez, poring over the initial forensic reports, felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. This was not the act of a spontaneous opportunist. This was the work of someone deeply familiar with the terrain, with the forest's hidden infrastructure, and with a disturbing capacity for meticulous planning. The sheer audacity of holding a child captive beneath the very ground being scoured by hundreds spoke of a profound sense of entitlement, a belief in his own untouchability. Her mind returned to Tom Bradley, the retired ranger, and his critical insight into the abandoned tunnels. If this individual knew of these forgotten passages, he likely possessed a similar, perhaps even more detailed, knowledge. Rodriguez ordered a deep dive into the park's historical employment records, specifically targeting individuals who would have had access to old blueprints, survey maps, or who had worked on maintenance crews in the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds when these tunnels were active. The search narrowed. Dozens of names were cross-referenced, with local police databases for any prior offenses, any reports of unusual behavior, any grievances. Among the files, one name began to surface with increasing frequency: Marcus Chen. Marcus Chen, now 42 years old, had been a seasonal park employee 5 years prior. His employment record, initially unremarkable, revealed a pattern of increasing social withdrawal and minor disciplinary actions related to insubordination and a general resistance to supervision. He had been hired for his specialized knowledge of the park's less traveled areas, often tasked with trail maintenance and boundary surveys in remote sections. His work, by all accounts, was meticulous, almost obsessive, but his interpersonal skills were poor, and his temper, on occasion, flared into quiet, simmering resentment. He had been terminated 5 years ago, officially for repeated insubordination and failure to adhere to safety protocols. Unofficially, according to his former supervisor, he was a loner with a chip on his shoulder, obsessed with the forgotten corners of the forest. The supervisor's notes from Chen's exit interview painted a picture of a man who felt wronged, betrayed by the very system he had served. He had lashed out, not with violence, but with a chillingly detached accusation that the Park Service didn't understand the true nature of the forest or the important things hidden within it. Rodriguez pulled Chen's full personnel file. His job duties had specifically included surveying and assessing the integrity of decommissioned infrastructure, a category that explicitly covered the 1,960 seconds fire suppression tunnels. He had access to the old maps, the faded blueprints, the knowledge of their exact locations and internal configurations. He knew which ones were stable, which ones were prone to collapse, and critically, which ones offered hidden access points off the main trails. A psychological profile began to coalesce around Chen. His termination had evidently festered, turning a quiet resentment into a deep-seated grievance. His obsession with forgotten corners was now reinterpreted as a strategic advantage, a weapon. The calculated nature of the abduction, the meticulous setup of the underground prison, the careful monitoring of supplies, the consistent twice-daily visits, the deliberate masking of his identity. These were not the actions of a spontaneous criminal. They were the hallmarks of a highly organized, controlled individual. Someone who viewed his actions not as a crime, but as a perverse, meticulously planned project. The chilling possibility emerged. Chen had used his intimate, expert knowledge of the Olympic National Forest, gained through his former employment, to select the perfect, undetectable location for his hidden prison. He had known about the specific tunnel, its remoteness, its forgotten status, its structural integrity, and its proximity to the Ho River Trail. He had chosen it, not by chance, but by design. He had transformed his professional expertise into a tool for unimaginable control. The DNA profile from the tunnel was run against any available samples associated with Marcus Chen in national and state databases. The match was immediate. A cold, undeniable certainty settled over the investigation. The man who had held Madison Wells captive, who had orchestrated this elaborate, hidden horror, was Marcus Chen. The hunt intensified, fueled by a renewed sense of urgency and a terrifying clarity. Chen was not a phantom. He was a known individual, a former insider who had turned his knowledge against the very wilderness he was once paid to protect. His intimate understanding of the forest meant he could easily disappear within its vastness. He was likely armed, certainly dangerous, and almost certainly aware that his carefully constructed world had been breached. Law enforcement agencies across Washington state were alerted. Chen's last known address, a small apartment in a town bordering the forest, was raided. It was empty. Neighbors described him as quiet, reclusive, often disappearing for days or weeks at a time, always returning from the direction of the park. His car, an older model pickup, was also missing. Rodriguez ordered a statewide bulletin detailing Chen's physical description and the specific dangers he posed. The full weight of the state's resources was now directed at finding him. Every ranger station, every remote cabin, every abandoned logging road, Every old fire lookout was checked. Tom Bradley, his face grim, provided insights into likely places a man like Chen, with his particular knowledge and reclusive habits, might seek refuge. He spoke of old trappers' cabins, long-forgotten hunting camps, and remote, unmarked shelters deep within the forest's vast interior. The realization that Chen had been so close, operating with such chilling precision beneath their very feet, sent a shiver through the entire search team. He had not only abducted Madison, he had mocked the efforts of hundreds, hiding in plain sight, using the very landscape they searched as his shield. The danger he represented was not just to Madison, but to any who might stumble into his carefully constructed, hidden world. The clock was ticking, not just for justice, but to prevent any further suffering at the hands of a man whose meticulous planning and intimate knowledge of the forest had turned him into a terrifying, elusive ghost. The hunt for Marcus Chen, the quiet, resentful man who had twisted utility into a tool for unimaginable control, was now on. The manhunt for Marcus Chen spanned days, extending far beyond the immediate perimeter of Olympic National Forest. Detective Rodriguez and her teams worked tirelessly, poring over every lead, every potential sighting. Tom Bradley's insights proved invaluable, guiding search efforts towards the forgotten, often unmarked corners of the vast wilderness where a man like Chen, with his particular blend of reclusiveness and detailed knowledge, might seek to vanish. He spoke of disused logging camps, long-abandoned trappers' cabins, and rudimentary shelters built by prospectors decades prior, places that existed only in the oral history of the forest or on the most ancient, faded maps. These were not places that appeared on modern GPS, but rather locations that required an almost instinctual understanding of the terrain. One such lead, a tip from a local hunter who recalled seeing an older model pickup truck near a barely discernible track, led them 80 miles east, away from the Ho River Valley and into a more remote, mountainous section bordering the forest. The track terminated at a small, dilapidated cabin, nestled deep within a thicket of second-growth timber, its windows boarded, its chimney showing no signs of recent smoke. It was the kind of place designed to be overlooked, a final refuge for a man determined to disappear. At approximately 3:30 on July 29th, a tactical team, following Rodriguez's meticulous planning, surrounded the cabin under the cover of pre-dawn darkness. The apprehension of Marcus Chen was swift and without incident. He offered no resistance, his face a mask of detached resignation as he was led away. His carefully constructed world had finally crumbled, not beneath the indifferent weight of the forest, but under the relentless pressure of human investigation. Inside the cabin, investigators discovered a chilling testament to Chen's meticulous planning and twisted obsession. The small, Spartan living space was dominated by an array of detailed maps, spread across a makeshift table, many of them annotated with hand-drawn additions and symbols. These were not just standard Park Service maps, but specialized survey charts from the 1,960 showing the precise locations and internal schematics of every fire suppression tunnel in the region, including the one that had been Madison's prison. Red circles marked potential new sites, while green lines traced intricate escape routes through the dense forest. It was a cartography of control, a perverse blueprint for hidden dominion. Alongside the maps, a collection of surveillance equipment was found: night vision binoculars, a high-powered spotting scope, and several miniature trail cameras, some still containing memory cards with images of remote trails, wildlife, and, chillingly, what appeared to be distant, blurry photographs of Madison's family campsite in the days leading up to her abduction. This was not a crime of opportunity, but a calculated, long-term project of observation and selection. Most disturbing were the journals, stacked neatly on a shelf, Bound in leather, they contained hundreds of pages of Chen's small, precise handwriting. Dating back years, these journals were not simply a record of his daily life, but a chronicle of his festering resentment, his sense of grievance against the Park Service, and the evolution of his dark fantasy. He wrote of the forest as a living entity, its secrets entrusted only to those who truly understood it, and of his desire to curate its hidden spaces, to claim ownership over its forgotten infrastructure. His entries detailed his termination, his perceived betrayal, and his growing obsession with the idea of a perfect sanctuary within the tunnels. The journals laid bare a chillingly rationalized internal world, where Madison's captivity was not a crime but a perverse act of control, a demonstration of his superior knowledge, and a twisted form of revenge against a world he felt had wronged him. He had meticulously planned every detail, every supply drop, every interaction, seeing himself not as a captor, but as the architect of a hidden order. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus Chen was charged with kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and assault. The trial that followed, though emotionally taxing for the Wells family, was methodical and decisive. Detective Rodriguez presented a mountain of forensic evidence. Madison's DNA found in the cabin, Chen's DNA from the tunnel, the distinctive tool markings on the industrial-grade chains matching tools found in Chen's possession, the surveillance photos, the maps, and the damning journals. Madison, though still fragile, provided a courageous, clear account of her ordeal, recounting the man in the park ranger uniform, the masked visits, and the chilling silence of her underground prison. Her testimony, delivered with a quiet strength that belied her age, painted a vivid picture of the terror she had endured. The prosecution argued that Chen's actions were premeditated, a meticulous plot hatched over years, exploiting his intimate knowledge of the forest and its forgotten infrastructure. The defense, largely based on a plea of temporary insanity, crumbled under the weight of the evidence and the chilling rationality of Chen's journals. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Marcus Chen was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, a judgment that delivered a measure of justice, though it could never erase the trauma he had inflicted. For Sarah and David, it was a profound, if somber, resolution. The man who had stolen their daughter's childhood would spend the remainder of his own life in a different kind of prison. Madison's recovery was a long and arduous journey, a testament to her innate resilience and the unwavering love of her family. Physically, she healed, the scars on her wrists fading into faint lines. But the psychological wounds ran deeper, requiring extensive therapy, patient understanding, and the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding trust in a world that had suddenly revealed its capacity for unimaginable cruelty. Sarah and David became her constant anchors, providing a safe harbor where she could process the trauma, grieve for the lost innocence, and slowly, courageously, reclaim her life. She found solace in her art, sketching intricate patterns and landscapes in her notebook, a quiet act of defiance against the darkness she had experienced. From the depths of their suffering, the Wells family found a new purpose. Their ordeal had exposed a terrifying vulnerability: the existence of countless, forgotten, unsecured structures within the nation's vast forest systems, relics of a bygone era that could easily become instruments of malevolence. Sarah Wells, channeling her grief and fierce protective instincts, became the driving force behind a nationwide advocacy campaign. David, with his quiet strength, stood by her side, lending his voice and unwavering support. They championed what would become known as Madison's Law. This landmark legislation, born from unimaginable pain, mandated a complete and comprehensive survey of all defunct, decommissioned, or abandoned infrastructure within Washington's national forests and, eventually, across the country. It required these structures, old fire access tunnels, abandoned ranger stations, disused logging cabins, forgotten bunkers, to be systematically identified, mapped, secured, and, where appropriate, safely decommissioned. No longer would the wilderness hold such dangerous, forgotten secrets. The passage of Madison's Law was a monumental achievement, a tangible, life-saving legacy forged from suffering. It forced a reckoning with how well the ground beneath our feet was truly known, and how the very systems designed for public service could, in the wrong hands, be twisted into instruments of terror. Signs now stand at the entrances to national forests, not just in Washington, but across the country, bearing a small plaque, quiet and understated, yet profound in its meaning: Madison's Law, ensuring safety in our nation's forests. The story of Madison Wells remains an unsettling reminder of the unseen dangers that persist within our natural landscapes, of the dark knowledge possessed by those who once served the wilderness, and of the disturbing human capacity for malevolence lurking in plain sight. It is a testament to the resilience of a young survivor, the unwavering resolve of a family, and the quiet heroism of those who refuse to give up. The Olympic National Forest, vast and indifferent, continues its silent, ancient rhythm, its towering trees absorbing the echoes of human drama back into its moss-draped embrace. But now, thanks to a young girl's courage and a family's unwavering fight, its forgotten secrets are being systematically brought into the light, ensuring that the ground beneath our feet will never again harbor such a hidden horror.